Heard every week on the amateur radio bands all around the world, broadcast on low-power AM and FM stations all across the United States, and podcast on the Internet since 1993. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, the worldwide premier amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service of the air. Here are the stories for release around the earth as we come to air with edition number 1387 of This Week in Amateur Radio. The ARRL is requesting every amateur, member or not, to help pass the Amateur Radio Preparedness Act now before Congress. The National Council of Volunteer Examiner Coordinators Question Pool Committee has removed a question from the extra class question pool. September is National Preparedness Month. We will have the latest from the ARRL on how you can prepare. AMSAT announces the results of its 2025 Board of Directors election. We will tell you why China's Great Solar Wall is of importance. AMSAT Sweden writes to radio manufacturers requesting availability of full duplex handheld transceivers. NASA contracts with SpaceX to deorbit the International Space Station in the near future. Hams are needed to assist in tracking the upcoming Artemis II moon mission. The MORE project seeks to license young people interested in amateur radio. A radio club in California helps amateurs that lost their stations to the wildfires replace their equipment. Amateur radio licenses are suspended in Equatorial Guinea. A U.S.-based pirate FM broadcaster is fined nearly $1 million by the FCC. And a radio group in one California county is helping residents correctly program their weather radios for local alerts. We will have the story. These headline stories will come to you in a moment along with this week's special features. We'll visit with Bruce Page, KK5DO, and get an update from AMSAT and what's new with all of those amateur satellites in orbit. Australia's own Arno Benshop, VK6FLAB, and Foundations of Amateur Radio will tell you how he has fun when he plays with radio. Our own amateur radio historian, Will Rogers, K5WLR, returns with part 2 of a brand new edition of A Century of Amateur Radio. This week, Will takes us back to 1922, where we find the steadily increasing use of CW paralleled explorations of ever shorter wavelengths, and the two pursuits complemented each other. Amateurs were setting new records at a whirlwind pace. This week's episode is entitled Trans-Pacifics. And we will stop by and visit with Bill Sawyers, AJ8B in the DX Corner, with all the latest news on DXpeditions, DX, upcoming radio sport contests, and more. That's all straight ahead as North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service, This Week in Amateur Radio, takes to the air right now. Reporting from our studios here in beautiful, colorful Albany, New York, where the fall colors are beginning to come out. I'd say we're at about 40% right now here at our studios. This is George, W2XBS.
And reporting this week from the sleepy little town of Cortlandville, New York, I'm Chris Perrine, KB2FAF.
And reporting from our news bureau in Rochester, New York, along the southern shore of Lake Ontario, I'm Dave Wilson, WA2HOY.
And reporting from our Tennessee News Bureau, where nothing ever changes, this is Al Shepard, WK8W.
And reporting from our bureau in Dallas, Texas, I'm Tammy, KI5ODE.
And reporting from our news bureau in beautiful Sandwich, Illinois, I'm Jordan Kurtz, Kilo Echo 9, Bravo, Papa Oscar.
And reporting live from the warm and humid Space Coast in Florida, I am Ed Johnson, W2PH.
And reporting from our Troy, New York News Bureau, where we received some much-needed rain this week, I'm Eric, Kilo Delta 2, Romeo Juliet X-Ray.
And reporting from our radio outpost in the western Catskill Mountains of upstate New York, where 3 inches of rain, high winds, and a mini tornado have been making life very interesting here in the last couple of days. I'm Don Hulick, K2ATJ.
And reporting from our news bureau in Fayetteville, Arkansas, where we're waiting for autumn's colors, I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR.
The ARRL is requesting that every radio amateur in the United States send letters to Washington as we continue our nationwide grassroots campaign to pass the Amateur Radio Emergency Preparedness Act, H.R. 1094, and S459 to secure antenna rights. John Ross, KD8 IDJ, is at League headquarters and files this report on how you can participate.
The process is simple. Go to the link that you'll find at www.arrl.org/HOA, put in your call sign, and press the red submit button. It takes a mere seconds. The letter will automatically be sent to your elected officials, encouraging them to support the Amateur Radio Emergency Preparedness Act. It is before Congress right now and would give amateur radio operators the same rights to install antennas on their property as those enjoyed by users of TV antennas, wireless internet, and flagpoles. It is critical that every ham add their voice. Without it, members of Congress don't know how vital this legislation would be to our use of the amateur radio service during times of crisis, or how it can help inspire the future generation of America's technical leaders through getting the youth hands on the air with radio. ARRL CEO David Minster, NA2AA, was the guest on the Ham Radio Crash Course YouTube channel. Host Josh Nash, KI6NAC, talked with Minster for 45 minutes about this important letter-writing campaign. ARRL West Gulf Division Director John Robert Stratton, NA5AUS, shared insight into the importance of getting every ham to send a letter on the W5KUB Amateur Radio Roundtable podcast with Brett Glass, WY7BG, and Glenn Popeil, KW5GP. You can see that discussion on YouTube, listen to it on Podbean, or view it on Facebook. ARRL is encouraging amateur radio clubs to provide letters of support and empowering them with the tools to do so. For individual hams, the process is quick and easy. Just click on the link, enter your call sign. The system will fill in the rest based on your FCC information, and click the red button. It really is that simple and that important. You don't have to be an ARRL member to send the letter. So send your letter now and tell your officials to pass the bill. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
You don't have to be an ARRL member, said Stratton. Any amateur radio operator in or out of an HOA should go to the website and send a letter to their representatives. ARRL is also encouraging radio clubs to provide letters of support and is urging each club officer to sign the letters. There are instructions for clubs on how to complete the letter and a sample letter that each club can customize with their information. The bills were introduced earlier this year in both the Senate and the House of Representatives. Previous versions have died in other sessions. Through the years, opponents of such measures have declared that these restrictions are vital to preserving the value of homeowners' investments in their properties and to retaining the aesthetics of a community. Amateurs maintain that they are seeking the same consideration given to TV antennas and satellite dishes under a federal law known as the Over-the-Air Reception Devices Rule, protecting TV, broadband, and direct satellite reception. The measures before Congress would enable hams to provide life-saving communication if disasters should strike. In the meantime, many hams have resorted to attic installations, stealth antennas, and other compromises. Once again, the measures introduced as H.R. 1094 and S459 are the latest versions under consideration. The Texas Ham Political Action Committee is working with the ARRL to provide amateur access with pre-written letters addressed to the lawmakers representing each region. The website generates the messages and delivers them electronically. ARRL newsletter, club website, social media platforms, and blogs have been directing hams to the online tool and urging them to respond. Influencers taking high-profile advocacy roles include Thomas Witherspoon, K4SWL, who hosts a well-read QR peer website for low-power and portable ops. Noting that his home in western North Carolina is not in an HOA, Thomas said that this is everyone's battle, regardless. He wrote that even in the midst of what he's calling an apocalyptic communications failure during Hurricane Helene last year, his modest home antenna was able to connect his family to a life-saving repeater on Mount Mitchell, letting him talk to emergency nets and local EOCs.
You're listening to North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine of the air. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, distributed worldwide at twiar.net.
The National Conference of Volunteer Examiner Coordinators Question Pool Committee has announced the immediate removal of extra class question E6D07, that is Echo 6 Delta 07, from the Element 4 extra class question pool and from use on examinations. The decision was made after it was determined that the question contained more than one correct answer. The current Element 4 extra class pool, effective July 1, 2024, remains valid through June 30, 2028. All volunteer examiner coordinators and examiners are instructed to remove E6D07 from examination as soon as possible. Updated files reflecting this change are now available for download at the NCVEC website. The ARRL VEC advises the community to regularly check the National Conference of Volunteer Examiner Coordinators website for updates to the question pools, which may include errata and withdrawn questions.
Amateur radio has long been a vital partner with served agencies in providing communication support, passing traffic, and performing other tasks, both in times of crisis and in times of community service. Through community events, hams help out before and when all else fails. The best way to become a part of serving the greater good in your area is by joining your local ARRL Amateur Radio Emergency Service Group. Every disaster starts and ends at the local level, and so should community resilience through radio, said ARRL Director of Emergency Management Josh Johnston, KE5MHV. Local ARES groups are set up based on the needs of the local community, and local volunteers are critical to making sure they are able to serve when needed. ARRL has a tool to help hams get plugged in with the group near them. An interactive map available on the League's website will let those interested in serving connect with local leadership. There's a downloadable PDF flyer available that talks about what ARES does at the local level. As September ends, the lessons from National Preparedness Month shouldn't stop with the change of the calendar. As ARRL sections prepare for the simulated emergency test coming up in October, being a trained member of a local ARES group will add to your personal, family, and community resilience.
The International Space Station has been in orbit around the Earth, at least in sun form, since November of 1998, but not without help. In the vacuum of space, an object in orbit can generally be counted on to remain zipping around more or less forever, but the station is low enough to experience a bit of atmospheric drag, causing its orbit to decay. It isn't much, but it saps enough velocity from the station that without regular reboost to speed it back up, the orbiting complex would eventually come crashing down. Earlier this month, a specially modified SpaceX Cargo Dragon became the newest addition to the list of spacecraft that can perform a reboost. The craft will boost the station several times over the rest of the year, which will provide valuable data for when it comes time to reverse the process and deorbit the ISS in the future. To make reboosting with the Dragon possible, SpaceX has added additional propellant tanks and a pair of rear-firing Draco thrusters within the spacecraft in the unpressurized trunk module. This hollow structure is usually empty, but occasionally will hold large or bulky cargo that can't fit inside the spacecraft itself. It also occasionally has been used to deliver components destined to be mounted on the outside of the space station, such as the International Docking Adapter and the rollout solar panel. While the ability to have the Dragon raise the orbit of the International Space Station obviously has value to NASA, the implications of this experiment go a bit further. SpaceX has already been awarded the contract to develop and operate the deorbit vehicle, which will ultimately be used to slow down the station and put it on a targeted re-entry trajectory sometime after 2030. Now that the company has demonstrated the ability to add additional thrusters and propellant to a standard Dragon spacecraft via a module installed in the trunk, it's likely the deorbit vehicle will take a similar form. So while the development of this new capability is exciting from an operational standpoint, especially given deteriorating relationships with Russia, it's also a reminder that the orbiting laboratory is entering its final days.
In Equatorial Guinea, where the government has suspended ham radio licenses after what it called unauthorized operations of a de-expedition. As de-expeditioners called off the 3C0W and 3C3W activations in Equatorial Guinea, the government suspended all amateur radio licenses in the country. Authorities made the announcement, saying that a visiting ham radio operator gained access to sensitive areas in the country with radio equipment that was unauthorized. The government announcement did not identify the radio operators, but various DX sites online listed Eurus YL2GM and Eugene EA5EL as DXpeditioners operating from Annobon Island in the South Atlantic Ocean. Both call signs were seen on the spotting clusters, with 3C0W's last spot made on September 11th, accompanied by the comment that there was bad news reported on the DXWorld.net. The report said the operation had gone forward without properly verifying the legality of the equipment or the compliance of the assigned frequencies with national regulations. In its announcement, the Malibu government did not identify the call signs, but said that the hams had applied for licenses in 2018 and this year, but had not verified that the equipment to be used was in legal compliance. Eurus posted an update on DXWorld confirming that the team had not yet managed to get the local permit to operate as 3C0W in Annobon Island, and that they were returning to the mainland where they had previously had a successful activation as 3C3W. Meanwhile, authorities said that the suspension of licenses will enable the government to develop a new regulatory framework with respect to legal frequencies and equipment, an action it said also aligns with national security requirements. A government statement said the goal is to ensure that no high-frequency equipment enters the country without proper approval and review of the license. The news comes 1 month before the scheduled 3C2MD DXpedition of the Mediterraneo DX Club International, which is to operate from October 30th through November 11th. It is unclear what impact this move by the government will have on upcoming planned DXpeditions.
The Radio Society of Great Britain has responded to a further Ofcom consultation, which would see new users sharing spectrum within the 2.3 GHz amateur band. The latest proposals would enable a new class of short-notice outdoor deployments in the 2,320 to 2,340 MHz range for up to 14 days at a time. In its response, the Radio Society of Great Britain has taken the opportunity to highlight strong concerns regarding the UK amateur weak signal segment at the 2,320 MHz frequency. This follows earlier Ofcom proposals last year for indoor use only in this frequency range.
The Make Operating Radio Easier or More project is an initiative to reduce both gender and age imbalances in amateur radio through education and hands-on activities. The ambitious goals of the More project, running through June 2026, are to train and license 500 new U.S. radio amateurs, to examine and explore various types of radio signals, such as by using software-defined radio, and to help our new hams learn basic communications protocols by observing and participating in HF and VHF operations. Amateur radio involves all of the aspects of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, and can lead to degrees and occupations in these fields. While hams enjoy this lifelong hobby worldwide, they are also a critical part of local, national, and international emergency readiness, as their communications are possible even during severe infrastructure failures due to catastrophic circumstances. Our training course is provided in 6 sessions, typically one 2.5-hour session per week, and may be scheduled to occur virtually and/or in person. Students must have access to the Internet in order to view and download study materials and to participate in Zoom sessions using video and audio. Our students are also expected to study using the materials that we provide at least 1/2 hour per day during all 6 weeks of the More course. Our grant covers the costs of training, testing, and licensing students who have applied and been accepted into the More project. Students who attend and complete a More project-approved course, pass the amateur radio technician exam, and receive their call sign and license from the FCC will receive a handheld radio from the More project, plus additional coaching in how to get on the air. Resource materials can be found at the More Project resource page. The More project is supported by a grant from Amateur Radio Digital Communications.
You are listening to North America's premier news and information service for the amateur radio hobbyist. We are This Week in Amateur Radio.
The nightmare of last January's wildfires are still burned quite literally into the memories of those in Altadena and the Pacific Palisades who suffered overwhelming personal loss. Ham radio operators in the region, however, are helping other hams restore their shacks and the safety net of communications they provided at the time. Rebuilding doesn't always call for brick, mortar, wood, or steel. Hams in the San Fernando Valley Amateur Radio Club, W6SD, are using antennas, coax power supplies, spare HTs, and base station radios instead. These pieces of vital equipment and others are being donated along with funds to help amateurs in the region refurbish the shacks that kept communication lines open during the Eaton and Palisades fire last winter, the same fires that ultimately destroyed the stations themselves. Club President Richard Franke, N6NCW, told the Los Angeles Times that the hams see the donation and loans as tools to repair the communication safety net so devastated last winter. He's been a part of the club and the community for nearly 50 years and knows that ham radio is about passing along the support so freely given through mentorship, loans, or outright gifts. According to the LA Times article, hams in the region who are still in need of equipment or assistance with their stations can contact the club through their Facebook page or website. The club is, of course, also offering mentorship and training for anyone wanting to join them on the air.
The FCC has taken action against a radio operator who the agency has charged with piracy. The Federal Communications Commission has given the operator of a New Jersey FM radio station 30 days to pay a penalty of $920,000 for what the regulator says is unlicensed operation of a radio station on 91.7 megahertz. The commission identified the station as Radio Leave Campi, which is described on a number of websites online as having Haitian Creole programming. The station's operator, Massner Beauplan of Middletown, New York, has been assessed a forfeiture of $920,000 for what the commission says were illegal broadcasts between November 16, 2023 and January 8, 2024. The FCC said that Beauplan had been sent a notice of apparent liability in September of 2024, but never responded. Failure to pay means that the regulator refers the case to the U.S. Justice Department, which is responsible for collecting the fines. The Preventing Illegal Radio Abuse Through Enforcement Act, or Pirate Act, of 2020 permitted the FCC to raise its fines when going after unlicensed broadcasters. Violating the Pirate Act carries a maximum penalty of approximately $2.4 million.
In Sonoma County, California, floods, wildfires, and earthquakes are among the best reasons for becoming a radio operator. With that in mind, the county's Department of Emergency Management has entered the second year of a 3-year program that includes helping more Sonoma Springs area's residents to get licensed and get on the air. The initiative has been funded through a $70,000 federal grant. Emergency management officials are now preparing for training sessions in October that will prepare area residents for an exam leading toward a license to use handheld radios, especially at times when cellular telephone networks fail. The radios are part of General Mobile Radio Services, or GMRS, a licensed service operating between 462 MHz and 467 MHz. The county is coordinating with amateur radio operators in the North Bay Communications Cooperative and its auxiliary communication system. The goal is to coordinate frequencies so that the GMRS users can work seamlessly within the broader emergency communication system. No matter what happens, you'll have something that will work, says Nancy Brown, emergency management specialist. The focus is on residents in the community of Sonoma Springs, which is classified as an evacuation zone when there are wildfires. The county's program can supply as many as 175 of the radios to participants who successfully complete the program.
In August, the AMSAT-SM group in Sweden issued an open letter to several major amateur radio manufacturers calling for the development of a new handheld transceiver with true full duplex capability. The initiative, led by Lars Thunberg, SM0TGU, highlights the strong demand within the satellite operating community for modern equipment that supports simultaneous transmit and receive on different bands without descents. The letter was sent to a dozen manufacturers, including ICOM, Kenwood, Yaesu, Alinco, Biofung, TYT, Waxon, Rativis, Anytone, QIT, Radtel, and Vero Telecom. These companies represent both long-established Japanese firms and newer Chinese brands that have introduced a wide variety of handhelds in recent years. While today's radio often features APRS, GPS, Bluetooth, and USB-C charging, none currently provide the full duplex FM capability needed for effective satellite operation. AMSAT-SM emphasized that full duplex operation is vital for amateur satellite use, allowing operators to hear their own downlink while transmitting. This feature was present in older, now discontinued models, such as the Kenwood THD-72, but is missing from all currently produced handhelds. The group argued that satellite operators would be willing to pay a premium for this capability, and that manufacturers could capture a unique market by stepping into this space. Among the minimum technical requirements outlined were extended filtering between the VHF and UHF bands, robust desense protection, support for both memory and VFO operation in duplex mode, CTCSS subtone transmission, and a rugged external antenna connector for portable Yagi antenna use. Practical considerations such as USB-C charging, selectable power output up to 5 watts, and energy-efficient design for longer battery life were also highlighted as priorities. AMSAT-SM further suggested several nice-to-have features that could broaden the radio's appeal. These include APRS with GPS, Bluetooth support for wireless handsets, and computer connectivity over Bluetooth for channel programming and Doppler control. The group specifically recommended implementing the CAT protocol over Bluetooth, which would allow operators to use existing satellite tracking and Doppler correction software without proprietary apps. As of August 30th, AMSAT-SM reported that 3 of the 12 manufacturers contacted had responded to their appeal, with one company moving forward in discussions. While details remain confidential, the group encouraged operators to stay tuned for updates. The effort reflects both the continuing innovation within the amateur satellite community and the strong desire for modern, purpose-built equipment to support space-based communications.
An enthusiastic team of operators felt swept away by the challenge of their recent islands on the air expedition to the Bajaras Rocks off the Chilean coast. Then something else was swept away, almost all of their equipment. The lost equipment includes the KPA 500, 1 IC 7000, 7 Dunestar 300 band pass filters, 2 laptops, 2 multiband antennas, 1 2-element Yagi, 1 Honda EU22i generator, 2 fiberglass masts, personal clothing, and more. This equipment and more are all gone now from the rock where the team on IOTA number SA100 began operating on August 18th as 3 Golf 1 Papa. Ocean swells, considered the worst seen in 5 years, forced Caesar, Victor Echo 3, Lima Yankee Charlie, Philippe, X-Ray Quebec 7, India Romeo, and Johann, Papa Alpha 3, Echo X-Ray X-Ray, to be evacuated by the Chilean Coast Guard 3 days later. Wearing wetsuits, the hams swam to the rescuers' boats, eyeing the carefully packed up equipment they had to leave behind on the rock. Already they were making plans to return for its retrieval. Sea conditions prevented anyone from gaining access to the rock again until August 26th. Afterward, the team wrote on their website, "Very bad news. There is absolutely nothing there except for the beam antenna that we left anchored, which has been damaged." They believe that all else was swept away by the sea. The de-expeditioners went on to express their utmost gratitude to those who supported this challenging project and those who generously contributed toward the replacement cost of their lost equipment and personal belongings.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available to download as a podcast from anywhere on the web podcasts are available.
Hello and welcome to the DX Corner for your weekly dose of DX as part of Ham Radio's oldest ham radio magazine on the air, This Week in Amateur Radio. I'm Bill, AJ8B. As of this Saturday, there will be 88 days until Christmas. Time is really flying, so we better get started. The DX word for the week is cubicle quad. I received an email from Bill, KB8DF. He asked, quote, "When I was growing up during the CB craze, many of the guys I worked with put up what they called a quad. I know that ham radio stations also use quads or cubicle quad antennas. What is this antenna? Is it the same?" Great question, Bill. A cubicle quad antenna consists of one or more square or diamond-shaped loops of wire, each loop forming a full wavelength at the frequency you intend to build it for. These loops are typically mounted on a cross-shaped frame made of insulating material like fiberglass or wood. The antenna is called a quad because each loop has 4 sides, forming a cube-like structure when multiple elements are used. There is a driven element that is the main loop connected to the feed line. It is responsible for transmitting or receiving signals. There may also be reflectors and or directors. These are additional loops placed behind and in front of the driven element to enhance directionality and gain. Typically, this antenna has an impedance of 50 or 75 ohms, allowing the antenna to use standard coax cables. The structure that forms the square is typically made of fiberglass, wood, or bamboo. These are called spreaders. Fiberglass is preferred for durability and minimal interference. Aluminum booms are common but must be carefully insulated so as not to interfere with the antenna. Bare copper wire is most often used to form the antenna around the spreaders. The cubicle quad was invented in the 1940s by Clarence Moore at HCJB radio station in Ecuador to solve corona discharge issues with Yagi antennas at high altitudes. Its closed-loop design eliminated open ends where electrical breakdown occurred. If you're interested, there's a DX workshop in Bowling Green, Kentucky next weekend, Saturday, October 4th. The sessions will cover DX basics and overview, DX operating techniques, and RF propagation. Check out wkdxa.org/events for more details or contact me at thedxmentor@gmail.com. I can guarantee that this will be the best $15 that you have spent for a day of DX networking and learning. Each week, I try to focus on those entities that will be available in the next 7 days. There's so much data to sift through that I have thought a focus on the next week might be helpful to you. Here's what you should find QRV when you tune the bands. The following DX information comes from Bernie, W3UR, editor of the Daily DX, the Weekly DX, and the How's DX column in QST. If you would like a free 2-week trial of the Daily DX, your only source of real-time DX information, just do what several other listeners have done. Drop me a note at thedxmentor@gmail.com and I'll fix you up. ES90 ERAU, or Echo Sierra 90 Echo Romeo Alpha United, is a special Estonian call sign that is QRV until September 30th, celebrating the 90 years of the Estonian Radio Amateur Union, registered with authorities on March 1st of 1935. Their first annual meeting was September 22nd of 1935. The ERAU joined the IARU in 1938, but activities were halted because of World War II and later Soviet occupation. ERAU was restored in December 1991, with the Estonian public restored a few months earlier on August of 1991. 5 Baker 4 Alpha Quebec Nancy is QRV as 3 Baker 8/5 Bravo 8 Alpha Quebec Nancy from Mauritius until October 4th. He will be operating, quote, holiday style with an ICOM 7300, mostly on CW. Roman plans 40 through 6 meters operation as well, and maybe some 80 meters. You can QSL the 3 Baker 8 operation to 5 Baker 4 Alpha Quebec Nancy. And by the way, Roman also holds the R5AA call sign. Benjamin DB2LS is QRV as Alpha 25 Lima Sierra from Botswana until September 30th. Likely 20, 12, and 10 meter FT8 in sideband. And you can QSL that Botswana operation to DB2LS or via LOTW. Garibin PG5M says he's packed for his journey to Bhutan beginning September 29th with a stop in Dubai and from there to Bhutan. He has a hex beam which covers 20 through 6 meters. He says he will likely follow the encouragement given by Steve, Hotel Alpha Zero Delta United, to give 6 meters a try. Gerben will be QRV as A52G from October 1st to the 8th. Now, this brings to mind some discussions we've been having recently on the DX Mentor podcast. If you have only a slightly passing interest in DX and you think someday, I may just give this DX chasing thing a try, you can't pass up things like Bhutan or Peter the First or Bouvet. These kinds of activations are only on every 5, 10, 15, or 20 years. So if you don't get them now, you won't get them for a long time. And there are several that were on years ago when I was a young DXer that I wasn't paying that much attention to that I'm just now getting to. So if you have any interest at all, you should try to get them in the log and you'll have them. And if you never chase DX, that's all right. Maybe you'll have the log and you'll have a cool QSL card. So just my advice. Sierra 79-DL2SBY, Casimir, will be in the Seychelles Islands until October 12th on HF with verticals and an inverted V. On 6 meters, he'll have a 5-element Yankee. He will upload the log to Club Log and LOTW, and you can also QSL him direct at DL2SBY. Chris, W4WF, will be on a business trip to the United Arab Emirates through early October. Without a lot of time for radio, N1DG, who has a long history of Abu Dhabi visits, put him in touch with EARS Club Station, and he has gotten permission to operate from there. His current plan is to visit the club station first on September 29th, local morning, and then to be on the air by 05 Zulu. If that goes well, he'll go back on October 3rd, local afternoon, and work the high bands. He has been advised that morning and evening are the best times to work North America from there. He thinks he'll concentrate on 30, 17, and 12 if they can give him a good rate. He hopes to work a lot of his CW Ops friends. Well, I've worked him before, and I'm in CW Ops, so I hope I'm a friend, and I hope I get him in the log. The DX Mentor features a new YouTube episode this weekend. Steve, AG4W, will share the details on the upcoming DX petition to 3 Charlie 2 Mike Delta, Equatorial Guinea. Check it out and let me know what you think. If you're interested in DX podcast and YouTube channels, you should check out the DX Mentor Facebook page and subscribe to be kept up to date on all of the DX activities. And by the way, if you're listening to this on Saturday, you still have quite a bit of time that you can spend in the CQ Worldwide RTTY contest, and I would encourage you to do that. If you do, please let me know how you do and what you thought. Until next week, this is Bill, AJ8B saying 7-3, and thanks to my XYL Karen for her love and support. I hope to hear you in the pile-ups. Have a great DX week.
Just as the schools are back throughout the UK, so is the DMR project launched by the Radio Society of Great Britain. The initiative was introduced last May to loan equipment to schools to enable students to feel comfortable with making QSOs on the air. Now it is back, as the schools and colleges reopen this month. The Society's outreach team is working with teachers and, in partnership with the Radio Communications Foundation, they will pay license exam fees for 9 teachers who wish to set up ham radio clubs at their schools. Additional details are available from Chris Aitken, Mike 0, Whiskey India Charlie, the youth chair, who can be reached at youthchampion.school@rsgb.org.uk.
4 research volunteers will soon participate in NASA's year-long simulation of a Mars mission inside a habitat at the agency's Johnson Space Center in Houston. This mission will provide NASA with foundational data for human exploration of the Moon, Mars, and beyond. Ross Elder, Ellen Ellis, Matthew Montgomery, and James Spicer enter into the 1,700-square-foot Mars Dune Alpha habitat on Sunday, October 19th, to begin their mission. The team will live and work like astronauts for 378 days, concluding their mission on October 31st, 2026. Emily Phillips and Laura Marie serve as the mission's alternate crew members for this Houston event.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available as an on-demand stream from Spotify, Deezer, and wherever podcasts are available.
Foundations of Amateur Radio. The other day I came across an article written by programmer, artist and game designer Bulindri with the intriguing title 50 Things You Can Do with a Software-Defined Radio. Documenting a week's worth of joyous wandering through the radio spectrum, it explains in readily accessible terms how they used an RTL SDR dongle to explore the myriad radio transmissions that surround us all day and every day. As you might know, I've been a radio amateur since 2010, and I must confess, even with all the things I've done and documented here, there's plenty in this adventure guide that I've yet to attempt. For example, when was the last time you decoded the various subcarriers in an FM broadcast signal, including the pilot tone, the stereo signal, station meta, and road traffic information? Have you ever decoded the 433 MHz sensor signals that your neighbours might have installed, weather, security, and other gadgets? Or decoded shipping data transmitted using AIS or Automatic Identification System? And for context, we're only up to item 12 on the list. One of the biggest takeaways for me was that this is something that is accessible to anyone and is a family-friendly introduction to the world of radio that amateurs already know and love. The article touches on various applications that you might use to explore the highways and byways of the radio spectrum, including SDR++, SDR Angel, WSJTX, QSSTV, and even mentions GNU Radio. With enough detail to whet the appetite, I learned that SDR Angel, developed by Edward, Foxtrot 4 Echo X-Ray Bravo, and 70 other contributors, has all manner of interesting decoders built in, like ADS-B, Stereo FM, RDS, DAB, AIS, weather balloon telemetry, APRS, even VOR. As it happens, you don't even need to install SDR Angel to get going. Head on over to sdrangel.org and click on WebSDR, and it'll launch right in your browser. Once you're up and running, you can use your RTL SDR dongle to start your own small step into the wide world of radio, amateur or not. Sadly, the Pluto SDR does not work on the experimental web version, so I had to install SDR Angel locally. That said, I did get it to run and connect to my Pluto SDR, which worked out of the box. The user tutorial is online, and the quick start walks you through the process of getting the software installed and running. One thing that eluded me for way too long is the notion of channel decoders. Essentially, you configure the receiver, in my case a Pluto SDR, and start it running. You'll be able to change frequency and see the waterfall display, but nothing else happens. And there's no obvious AM, FM, or other mode buttons you'd find on a traditional radio. Instead, you'll need to add a channel decoder, cunningly disguised as a triangle with circles at the corners with a little plus symbol at the top. You'll find it immediately to the left of your device name. When you click it, you're presented with a list of channel decoders, which you can add to the workspace. This will do the work of actually decoding the signal that's coming into the software. SDR Angel also supports M17, FreeDV, RTTY, FT8, and plenty of other amateur modes, and includes the ability to transmit. Oh, did I mention it can also connect to remote Kiwi SDR receivers? I have to say, it's a joy to see software that I've previously looked at and admittedly shied away from, actually doing something with the radio spectrum around me. I will confess that SDR Angel has a lot of moving parts, and it's like SendMail, user-friendly, just picky whom it makes friends with. So, time to dig in, play around, and bring it to the next amateur radio field day show and tell, and share with the general public just how interesting the radio spectrum around us can be. I'm going to work my way through the 50 items, just for giggles. What are you waiting for? I'm Ono, Victor Kilo 6, Foxtrot Lima, Alpha Bravo.
It is time for this week's edition of AMSAT Satellite Shorts from All Over. And this week, we begin with news that a recent experiment demonstrated that a Bitcoin Lightning payment invoice can be relayed through the amateur radio satellite QO100, showcasing a new use of its wideband digital transponder. The test employed the AMSAT DL multimedia high-speed modem to convert a Bolt 11 Lightning invoice into an image file, modulate the data, and uplink it to QO100 at 25.5 degrees east in geostationary orbit. After being rebroadcast to Earth, the file was decoded by ground stations, the QR code was scanned, and the Lightning Network completed the payment settlement over the Internet. For amateur satellite operators, the project highlights QO100's ability to serve as a versatile platform for high-speed digital and multimedia experimentation. By carrying a novel real-world application such as cryptocurrency invoice, the satellite demonstrates how amateur payloads can support resilience testing for communications under censorship, outages, or disaster conditions. Though still limited to technically capable stations within the satellite's footprint, the milestone illustrates the expanding scope of amateur radio satellite experimentation. Next comes word that SpaceX is preparing to begin testing direct-to-device satellite communications late next year, following its $17 billion acquisition of S-band spectrum from EchoStar. Company president Gwynne Shotwell told attendees at World Space Business Week in Paris that this spectrum will support an entirely new generation of Starlink satellites designed for global handheld connectivity. SpaceX is already working with chip manufacturers to embed compatibility into consumer smartphones and with mobile network operators to deliver wholesale satellite capacity to their subscribers. Shotwell emphasized that owning globally cleared spectrum avoids the clunky process of negotiating national rights and provides a more streamlined way to cross international borders. She called the effort the beginning of a major technical push, requiring new payload designs and close partnerships across the telecom sector. These larger Starlink satellites are planned for future launches aboard Starship, which is now progressing toward its next test flights as the platform for next-generation payloads. And finally, federal funding is set to expire September 30th for 19 active NASA science missions, including New Horizons and Juno, raising fears of shutdowns. The White House fiscal year 2026 budget proposal calls for a 25% cut to NASA overall and nearly 50% to the Science Mission Directorate, potentially terminating dozens of operating spacecraft. Among the missions at risk are the Chandra X-ray Observatory, Mars Orbiters, and New Horizons, which remains healthy and could operate into the 2040s, while continuing to study the Kuiper Belt. Juno, currently orbiting Jupiter, continues to deliver science despite radiation damage and is pioneering annealing techniques that could benefit future deep space missions and even Earth satellites. Scientists warn that turning off these spacecraft would permanently end their data return and erase decades of investment. Such cuts would not only jeopardize unique scientific opportunities, but also weaken U.S. leadership in planetary exploration at a time of growing international competition. Congressional action this fall will determine whether these missions survive or are shut down permanently.
ARDC, Amateur Radio Digital Communications, is looking for volunteers who serve on one of 4 committees. They include the Grants Advisory Committee, which helps identify potential grant-making opportunities, the Technical Advisory Committee, which provides input on policies and technologies for 44Net, amateur radio's Internet IP address space, the Grants Evaluation Team, whose responsibilities include reporting on the results of funded grants, and the Contact Review Committee, which oversees compliance with the Code of Conduct. The ARDC also needs 44Net portal ticket handlers who help verify call signs and other information for 44Net address space and help on its grants communications team, whose members write summaries to share with the public about the results of ARDC-funded grants. Details about the application process, volunteer qualifications, and time commitments for any of these posts can be found on the ARDC's website and blog. Most volunteers serve for a 1-year term from January through December. Committee time commitments range from 2 to 5 hours a week. The application windows to apply for an ARDC committee is open between September 16 and December 31. For those interested in applying may do so through a simple form. See the ARDC website for more details.
We pause for stations along the network to identify. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, your amateur radio and technology news magazine of the air, available as a podcast on iTunes, Google Play, iHeartMedia, and Spotify.
Welcome to the 43rd segment of Ham Radio History, a century of amateur radio, Ham's organizations, events, inventions. I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR. Our thanks to Chris Cadella, W2PA, for allowing us to use his website in the presentation of these segments. Now follow with us as we bring you this next chapter of Ham Radio History. Trans-Pacifics. This is part 2 of this segment. Record-breaking work continued well into summer, normally a period of inactivity in the old Spark days. Over 100 American amateurs in all districts were heard that summer in New Zealand, over 8,000 miles away, and 5 IM was reportedly heard in Ceylon, a distance of 10,000 miles. It was only a matter of time before amateurs would reach halfway around the world, and ARRL Secretary Warner wondered where it would all lead. He explained how signal enhancement occurs at an antipode, the point on the Earth diametrically opposite a transmitter's location, a commonly held belief at the time. It was understood that as signals spread out uniformly in all directions from the transmitter and their energy becomes spent and they weaken because of the large volume of ether they are putting into vibration, he wrote. But halfway around the world, they should reconverge, leading to possible enhancement of signal strength. There were some problems with testing this theory, however. The favorable season in the northern hemisphere, winter, happens to be the worst one in the south, summer. It was also difficult to find a signal path entirely in darkness, even one existing for only a short time. The complete analysis of the fading QSS test was finally released in late summer 1923, 2 years after its completion. One of the largest operations the League had ever organized, it had taken that long to get the final report together. The test was not entirely successful in meeting its goals, since the cause of signal fading was still unknown, but many interesting observations were made about the behavior of the short waves, which helped amateurs better understand their propagation. This was covered in a previous segment, QSS tests. Several effects were known to be happening. QSS was more pronounced at shorter wavelengths, inconsequential at 400 meters, rising with decreasing wavelength, but decreasing again below about 150 meters. It was never present within the daylight range of a transmitter. It was most noticeable at longer range and therefore at night. Everyone hoped that the tests would lead to some understanding of the causes of fading and point to a cure for it. The report expressed regret that the test had to be conducted using spark, but higher power tubes were not yet available when it ran. This illustrates the swiftness with which change was occurring. A new technology had become more widely available in the short time interval between the tests run and their final report. Although the report writers believed that many variables affected the behavior of fading, of the 10 they cited, 6 had to do with the weather, 1 was static, and only 3 had anything to do with other atmospherics, the presence of aurora, and the atmospheric conductivity and voltage gradient. Realistically, the design of the experiment was limited by what was measurable in 1921, and that did not yet include things such as solar wind or the characteristics of the upper atmosphere. Each test had a different objective, probing a different variable. Some were all conducted on the same wavelength to look for geographical effects. Others attempted to detect a wavelength dependency by having pairs of nearby stations transmit on adjacent wavelengths, for example, 250 versus 375 meters, and some involved pairs of stations transmitting on the same wavelength simultaneously. A total of 5,684 handwritten observation cards were sent in by the receiving station operators. These were transcribed to punch cards so that the Bureau of Standards could use their card sorting machine to arrange them in various interesting ways. Still concentrating mostly on weather conditions, the analysts showed that, although the barometric pressure at the transmitting station did not affect fading, it was significantly worse when the propagation path was along a barometric gradient, either up or down, and signals were marginally stronger when traveling along isobars or isotherms. Clouds were shown to have little or no effect on fading or signal strength. They were, however, shown to correlate with stronger strays, something considered common knowledge today. No conclusions could be drawn from the tests involving pairs of nearby transmitting stations, either on different or similar wavelengths, and there were no observations of any geographic directionality to fading effects. The analysis team proposed a theory that centered on the atmospheric layers through which radio waves propagated. Working from the ground upwards, there is the Earth's surface, which is poorly conducting, the troposphere, where weather happens, a suspected radioactive layer that was not well defined or substantiated by evidence, the stratosphere, which is ionized only in daylight, and the heaviside surface, about 100 kilometers high, above which is a region that is always ionized and perfectly conducting. Waves could not penetrate this highest layer and would therefore merely slide along it as they were thought to do at the Earth's surface. The difference was that waves sliding along the Earth are absorbed more readily than those sliding along the heaviside layer. This, it was said, accounted for the longer distances possible at night, since the intervening ionized stratosphere blocked waves from reaching the heaviside layer during the day. Variations in the heaviside surface and intervening layers is what most likely accounted for fading phenomena. The size of these irregularities in the layer might account for the fact that there is a range of wavelengths within which fading is more pronounced. The existence of zones where signal strength reaches a minimum before increasing again was explained by the waves being absorbed first as they move out from the transmitter, then at larger distances increasing again as they are propagated along the heaviside layer, which did not really explain why one needed to get far away to get the benefit. A variation of this theory proposed that self-interference effects were the main cause of fading. Signals propagating along differing paths due to the reflection from objects including atmospheric layers, clouds, fog banks, and other things could interfere with each other, either enhancing their strength or canceling each other out. It was a small step towards identifying the actual cause of signal fading. A more complete understanding would have to wait a few more years until amateurs explored much shorter wavelengths. It was clear, however, that fading was no freak. Included in this material are quotes from the following: International Amateur Radio, QST, August 1923, page 50. Final Report of the Fading Tests, Parts 1 and 2, QST, August 1923, page 29, and September 1923, page 23. With a tip of the TWIR cap to Chris Cadella, W2PA, for giving us permission to use his website's materials, Ham Radio History, A Century of Amateur Radio, Ham's Organizations, Events, Inventions, as we prepared this segment, I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR, reporting for This Week in Amateur Radio.
We pause for stations along the network to identify. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, available as a direct download on our website at www.twiar.net.
Bruce Page, KK5DO, is here now with this week's AMSAT report. Bruce?
Thanks, John. This story is rather interesting. For those that are currently operating through the satellites or those looking to get into operating, you know the issues with using a handheld radio. Correcting for Doppler is not easy. There are some radios out there that have Bluetooth, and there is an app for Android that will do the Doppler correction for you. However, that's only a small part of the problem. The other part is the full duplex ability. Currently, one of the only models available in a used condition is the Kenwood THD-72, which has been discontinued. What is the solution besides using two HTs or a full-size radio like the ICOM IC9700? Well, AMSAT Sweden sent a letter to a dozen manufacturers, including ICOM, Kenwood, Yaesu, Elenco, Bofang, TYT, Wuxen, Redivis, Anytone, QYT, Radtel, and Vero Telecom. They emphasize that many of today's HTs have USB-C charging APRS, GPS, and Bluetooth, but none featured full duplex. They noted that satellite operators would be willing to pay a premium for full duplex, and if you think about it, it means you do not have to purchase two radios, have a way of holding both, and the extra weight. They suggested a minimum of extended filtering between VHF and UHF bands, robust D-Sense protection, and support for both memory and VFO operation in full duplex mode, CTCSS subtone transmission, and a rugged external antenna connector. As of the end of August, there were 3 responses, with one company being interested. Thanks to AMSAT Sweden for taking on this and providing us the story. This is Bruce Page, KK5DO. Back to you, John.
And thanks, Bruce, for that report.
It is time for our weekly check on solar weather conditions and terrestrial propagation conditions. Solar activity reached moderate levels this past week. An impulsive M1.0 flare was observed on September 24 from region 4217. Slight growth was observed in region 4226 with an increase in spots near the leader. New regions 4229 and 4230 were numbered this period. All other regions were either stable or in decay. No Earth-directed coronal mass ejections were observed. Solar activity is expected return to low activity, with a chance for isolated M-class minor to moderate flaring through September 25. Solar wind parameters were indicative of the arrival of a negative polarity coronal whole high-speed stream. Solar wind speed increased from approximately 310 km per second to near 530 km per second. Total field showed an increase beginning on September 22. The coronal whole high-speed stream influence persisted through September 23 and will slowly diminish to background levels on September 25. A trend towards nominal solar wind conditions is expected through September 26 as Earth moves out of a geo-effective position with the coronal whole high-speed stream. For more information concerning radio propagation, visit the ARRL Technical Information Service, read a quick guide to HF propagation using solar indices, and check out the propagation page of Karl Lewetzelschwab, K9LA. For customizable propagation charts, visit the vocap online for ham radio website.
Just ahead in radio sports, September 27th, the Masonic Lodge is on the air. That's phone. September 27th through the 28th, the CQ Worldwide DX Contest, RIDI. That's data. September 27th through the 28th as well, the YU DX Contest, CW and phone. And the main QSO party, CW and phone. Also on September 27th to 28th, the AWA Amplitude Modulation QSO party, that is phone. September 30th, it's the 222 MHz Fall Sprint, CW, phone, and digital. And remember to visit the ARRL contest calendar for more events and information. Upcoming Section, State, and Division Convention, September 27th, the ARRL Dakota Division Convention, that's in Moorhead, Minnesota. October 4th, the Rock Hill Hamfest, hosting the ARRL South Carolina Section Convention, that's in Rock Hill, South Carolina. On October 4th, the Wichita Area Hamfest, hosting the ARRL Kansas Section Convention in Wichita, Kansas. October 10th through the 12th, Pacificon, hosting the ARRL Pacific Division Convention, that's in San Ramon, California. And on October 10th through the 11th, it's the Melbourne Hamfest, hosting the ARRL Florida State Convention, that's in Melbourne, Florida. And remember to search the ARRL Hamfest and Convention database to find more events in your area.
The WOW at Home project, inspired by the famous WOW signal detected in 1977, is advancing its effort to establish a global network of small, software-defined radio telescopes dedicated to searching for transient astrophysical events and potential technosignatures. Testing of hardware and software continues, though progress has been slowed by a shortage of low-noise amplifiers, a key component expected back in stock later this month. Project organizers note that the original WOW signal was strong enough to have been detected by a modest home telescope, underscoring the scientific value of a distributed approach. A worldwide network of small radio telescopes offers distinct advantages compared to professional observatories. These low-cost systems can operate autonomously around the clock, providing continuous sky monitoring that large instruments cannot sustain. Distributed across different time zones, the network allows global coverage, coincident detection of events, and rapid response to alerts. The approach is scalable, resilient, and accessible, making it ideal for education, citizen science, and wider participation in radio astronomy. The prototype WOW at Home telescope is a Meridian-style system modeled after the Big Ear telescope used in the Ohio State SETI project. With a fixed elevation and a wide 25-degree beam, the telescope surveys a full 360-degree strip of sky each day as the Earth rotates. Over time, multiple passes yield full sky coverage. While sensitivity is lower than professional instruments, this design provides valuable data on radio frequency interference, RFI, near the hydrogen line and creates a platform for detecting strong transient events. Central to the project is the WOW at Home software, now under development. Built initially in interactive data language and later to be translated to Python for broader access, the software acquires and analyzes data to identify transient events and reject RFI. Early test results include signal-to-noise plots, hydrogen spectral profiles of the galactic center, and narrowband event detections. A unique retro display option is also being developed to recreate the printout style of the original Ohio SETI experiments, connecting modern work to its historic roots. The WOW at Home network is not an interferometer and does not measure polarization at this stage. Its strength lies in continuous distributed monitoring for signals lasting from seconds to days. Coordinated observations across multiple sites can confirm weak or short-lived events, eliminate local interference, and provide complementary coverage to large observatories. Recent discoveries of fast radio bursts and long-period transients illustrate the types of phenomena that modest instruments may detect if deployed widely. Looking ahead, organizers estimate that at least 114 telescopes are required for basic sky coverage, with about 342 needed for effective redundancy and RFI rejection. At a cost of roughly $500 per station, the full network could be established for under $200,000, far less than a single professional facility. A public version of the WOW at Home software is expected by late 2025 or early 2026. Volunteers with expertise in RFI mitigation, graphical interfaces, or app development are encouraged to contribute.
Data centers and the electrification of devices that previously ran on fossil fuels is driving increased demand for electricity around the world. China is addressing this with a mega project that is a new spin on their most famous piece of infrastructure. At 250 miles long and 3 miles wide, with a generating capacity of 100 gigawatts, the Great Solar Wall will be able to provide enough energy to power Beijing, although the energy will more likely be used to power industrial operation and present in the Kabuki Desert. NASA states Kabuki's sunny weather, flat terrain, and proximity to industrial centers makes it a desirable location for solar power generation. As an added bonus, previous solar installations in China have shown that they can help combat further desertification by locking dunes in place and providing shade for plants to grow. Engineers must be having fun with the project, as they've also designed the Guinness World Record holder for the largest image made of solar panels with the Junma Solar Power Station, which they made in the shape of a horse. The Great Solar Wall is expected to be completed by 2030, with 5.5 gigawatts already installed in 2024.
You're listening to North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine of the air. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, distributed worldwide at twiar.net.
The National Aeronautics and Space Administration is seeking volunteers to passively track the 2026 Artemis II Orion spacecraft as the crewed mission travels to the Moon and back to Earth. John Ross, KD8 IDJ, is here with further details.
The Artemis II test flight will send NASA astronauts Reed Wiseman, Victor Glover, and Christina Koch, along with Canadian Space Agency astronaut Jeremy Hansen, on an approximately 10-day mission around the Moon. Targeted for no later than April 2026, the mission will rely on NASA's Near Space Network and Deep Space Network for primary communications and tracking support through its launch, orbit, and reentry. However, with a growing focus on commercialization, NASA wants to further understand how the industry's tracking capabilities will work out. This collaboration opportunity builds upon a previous request released by NASA's Space Communication and Navigation Program, SCAN, during the Artemis 1 mission in 2022. 10 volunteers successfully tracked the uncrewed Orion spacecraft on its journey thousands of miles beyond the moon and back. One of the volunteers tracking in 2022 was Scott Chapman, K4KDR of Montpelier, Virginia. Sometimes it's what you don't know that makes this kind of activity interesting, said Chapman. All I had was a small S-band dish and a receiver and wasn't quite sure what I could or couldn't hear, but when I started hearing the signal, it made everything worth it. Chapman said he felt good about the whole process, and while it was interesting, it was also fun. There were also other participants during the Artemis 1 mission, including international space agencies, academic institutions, commercial companies, nonprofits, and private citizens who were also attempting to receive Orion signals. Chapman added that NASA is also looking for commercial partnerships to share in that process. I'm John Ross, KD8I-DJ.
Once again, with their call signs, the Artemis 2 test flight will send NASA astronauts Reed Weissman, KF5LKT, Victor Glover, KI5BKC, and Christina Koch, along with Canadian Space Agency astronaut Jeremy Hansen, KF5LKU, on an approximately 10-day mission around the Moon. If you're interested in volunteering for next year's event, all of the information can be found at sam.gov. The response deadline is October 27, 2025 at 5 p.m. Eastern Time.
The 2025 AMSAT Board of Directors election concluded on September 15, 2025, with a total of 330 votes cast. 4 seats were up for election this year, with the 4 candidates receiving the highest number of votes elected to 2-year terms on the Board of Directors, and the candidate receiving the next highest number of votes designated as alternate director for 1-year term. The following have been elected to serve on the AMSAT Board of Directors: Drew Glassbrenner, KO4MA, with 261 votes, Jerry Buxton, N0JY, with 254 votes, Barry Baines, WD4ASW, with 245 votes, and Frank Karnauskas, N1UW, with 232 votes. And elected as alternate director, Douglas Tabor, N6UA, with 213 votes. The AMSAT Board of Directors is responsible for setting the organization's strategic direction, overseeing satellite projects and operations, supporting educational outreach, and fostering collaboration with partners worldwide. The board ensures that AMSAT continues to fulfill its mission of advancing amateur radio in space for the benefit of members and the broader amateur radio community.
The July-August 2025 edition of the AMSAT Journal is now available to members. The AMSAT Journal is AMSAT's bi-monthly digital magazine dedicated to amateur radio and space. Each issue features technical articles, educational initiatives, operating activities, and community news from around the world. Members can access both the latest edition and the full archive through the AMSAT member portal. This issue opens with Robert Bankston, Kilo Echo 4, Alpha Lima, delivering his final Apogee View column as AMSAT president. Bankston reflects on 5 years of leadership, thanking members and volunteers for their dedication, while emphasizing the need to continue pushing forward with higher orbits, expanded communications, and vigilance in protecting amateur frequencies. Educational outreach is another key theme, with Alan Johnston, Kilo Uniform 2 Yankee, providing updates on the CubeSat-SM project, STEM activity guides, and recent demonstrations in the U.S. and Australia. He also previews educational sessions at both the AMSAT Space Symposium and AMSAT UK Colloquium this October. Contest enthusiasts will enjoy Bruce Page's Kilo Kilo 5 Delta Oscar detailed report on the 2025 AMSAT Field Day. This year saw 17 participating stations with highlights including innovative setups, first-time satellite contacts, and several memorable QSOs with the ISS. Other technical features include Joe Kornowski's article, An Amateur Radio Eye on AI, exploring practical applications of artificial intelligence for weak signal decoding, propagation forecasting, and antenna optimization, as well as a comprehensive study on the experimental validation of the Mexican network of amateur satellite stations, showcasing citizen science collaboration across Mexico and beyond. Beyond the feature articles, the issue also highlights upcoming events, such as the 43rd Annual AMSAT Space Symposium and Annual General Meeting, scheduled for October 16th through the 19th in Phoenix, Arizona. Members will also find announcements on opportunities to support AMSAT through the President's Club and eBay for charity initiatives, reflecting the many ways volunteers and donors continue to strengthen AMSAT's mission of keeping amateur radio in space.
Radio amateurs are valuable resources to their communities in times of crisis. Here with this week's information for National Preparedness Month is John Ross, KD8IDJ.
This week, hams in Connecticut were featured in news coverage as they participated in a mass casualty drill with the St. Vincent Medical Center in Bridgeport. Several scenarios played out in which amateur radio volunteers helped the hospital connect with other medical facilities, including a targeted cyber attack, mass shootings, and explosions. While radio can provide resilience to communities, preparedness for those who would operate the radios begin at home. During National Preparedness Month, ARRL is sharing resources from the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, on how to be prepared. The starting point for building your own resilience is to understand what threats you face in your area. On the website, www.ready.gov, there are tools to learn what disasters could impact your specific area and how to prepare for them. ARRL Director of Emergency Management Josh Johnson, KE5MHV, says a plan should be tailored to threats you're likely to face. While we should all be ready for anything, there are going to be threats specific to a region. Everyone should be well aware of the events that happen in your area, he said. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
There is additional information on the FEMA website to learn about region-specific disasters such as hurricanes. Radio amateurs are encouraged to find an Aries group in their area at www.arrl.org/Aries.
Northrop Grumman's newest cargo spacecraft, the Cygnus XL, successfully arrived at the International Space Station on September 18th following its debut launch. The capture took place at 11:24 UTC as NASA astronaut Johnny Kim operated the station's Canadarm2 robotic arm to grapple the freighter, while the complex orbited about 420 kilometers above the Democratic Republic of Congo. The arrival came one day later than originally planned after the spacecraft overcame a thruster issue during rendezvous preparations. The mission, designated NG-23, lifted off on September 14th aboard a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. This launch marked the 23rd Cygnus resupply flight for NASA, continuing Northrop Grumman's role in commercial cargo delivery. The company partnered with SpaceX to provide launch services after previously relying on its Antares rocket. A thruster anomaly initially delayed Cygnus XL's approach, requiring mission planners to rework the trajectory for a safe capture. It's a very intricate planning exercise that we have to go through to arrive at the space station and rendezvous in a very specific point in space, explained Bill Spetch, NASA ISS Operations Integration Manager. Engineers resolved the issue, allowing the spacecraft to complete its final maneuvers and reach the station safely. Cygnus XL represents the largest and most capable version of the cargo vehicle to date. The freighter delivered approximately 4,990 kilograms of supplies, science experiments, and hardware, compared to about 3,855 kilograms on earlier flights. The debut also ended a year-long gap in Cygnus operations, caused by delays to the NG-22 mission, which was ultimately canceled following transport damage. The NG-23 vehicle was christened the SS William Willie McCool, honoring the NASA astronaut who lost his life in the 2003 Space Shuttle Columbia tragedy. To see a ship bearing his name safely arrive at the station is a reminder that his courage and kindness are still circling our beautiful planet Earth, said Kim after completing capture operations. On board are materials to advance research in multiple disciplines, including semiconductor crystal growth, pharmaceutical manufacturing, cryogenic fuel tank technology, and microbial control systems. NASA highlighted a specialized ultraviolet light unit to improve water system safety and crystal growth experiments that could lead to new cancer treatments. The SS McCool was berthed to the Unity module's Earth-facing port at 1410 UTC on September 18th and is scheduled to remain at the ISS until March 2026 before deorbiting to burn up in Earth's atmosphere.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio. Available worldwide as a podcast from our web at twiar.net.
JOTA and JOTI, the world's largest digital and amateur radio scout events, promoting friendship and global citizenship, will be back on the air October 17th through the 19th of 2025. JOTA and JOTI is an annual event with scouts from around the world connecting with each other by amateur radio, which is JOTA, and by using the internet called JOTI. JOTA and JOTI is held on the third full weekend of October every year, coordinated by the World Organization of the Scout Movement. Scouts wanting to participate in JOTA will need the support of at least one licensed amateur radio operator, or the support of a local amateur radio club. For participation in JOTI, scouts will need access to a computer, a phone or tablet, and an internet connection. For registration and all of the details, search JOTA-JOTI on the internet.
SUNY Canton EMS students will be participating in a St. Lawrence County-wide communications outage emergency simulation on October 4th. Working alongside local amateur radio groups, Radio Amateur Civil Emergency Service and Amateur Radio Emergency Service, approximately 20 students will be setting up communications to dispatch emergency services should the need arise, according to Director of Student Affairs Technology, Richard Thayer, who oversees the EMS squad. In the event of a county-wide communication failure, our collaboration with RACES and ARES will allow us to maintain operations, ensuring the safety of the SUNY Canton community and enabling us to dispatch necessary resources, Thayer said. We'd like to demonstrate that we have backups in place to keep the campus safe. Thayer added that both groups are using the exercise to recruit others who may be interested in providing the service. Students who are interested in joining SUNY Canton EMS can apply online. The volunteer operators from RACES and ARES will be deployed in strategic locations throughout the county, where they will serve as a vital link for relaying information and coordinating emergency response for any resources that may be needed. The groups consist of licensed operators who dedicate their skills and equipment to providing essential backup communications during emergencies and disasters. At SUNY Canton, RACES and ARES will operate from Lot 6 using a vehicle and portable antennas to support communications. The EMS students will conduct a tabletop drill in Dana Hall, testing their ability to respond to scenarios like a simulated car accident or medical emergency. RACES is a federal service that operates under the direction of local civil defense and emergency management agencies. ARES is a national organization that works in coordination with local authorities.
The UK regulator Ofcom is hoping to improve the licensing procedures that were introduced in 2021, covering non-geostationary satellite orbit systems used by businesses, individuals, and other entities, particularly in remote areas. The regulator opened a consultation earlier this month and is seeking comments up to November 18, 2025. Having issued 8 such network and 9 gateway licenses for these systems, Ofcom believes it is time to work towards a swifter decision-making process while minimizing the administrative burden on system operators. Ofcom is also looking at enabling the gateways to connect a broader range of satellite services using both the Q and V bands. The regulator intends to publish its decision early next year.
JAXA, the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency, has announced that 5 Japanese CubeSats were deployed from the International Space Station on September 19th. The deployment event for those satellites was broadcast via the YouTube JAXA channel. 4 of the CubeSats carrying scientific and educational payloads will operate in the amateur bands, and radio amateurs around the world are invited to participate in the individual projects. GHS-01 is a 2U size CubeSat equipped with a camera for photographing the Earth, a sensor for checking the state of the satellite, and an attitude control device. In response to commands from ground station, the satellite-mounted camera photographs the Earth from space and transmits the image data to the ground. In order for amateur radio users around the world to voluntarily acquire image data taken by this satellite by radio, the date and time of image transmission will be published. Also, the satellite carries a Digitalker mission. Audio data is transmitted from a ground station and stored in the satellite. The voice data is transmitted from the satellite as an analog FM voice signal, and a message is broadcast from space. The date and time the message will be sent will be published on the website. The satellite was built by Gifu University with technical cooperation from using satellite radio waves with sister schools of universities and high schools such as Lithuania, Australia, Kenya, South Korea, and Taiwan. A downlink on 437.090 MHz has been coordinated with 20 word per minute CW, 1K2 AFSK, 9K6 GMSK, and Digitalker voice. Dragonfly, coordinated by Kyushu Institute of Technology, is part of the joint global multi-nation bird satellite project, BirdX, and funded by Amateur Radio Digital Communications in the U.S. The 2U CubeSat will carry APRS digipeaters on 145.825 MHz, as well as a store and forward messaging system. In addition to the VHF APRS frequency, a UHF downlink for CW beacon and telemetry using 4K8 GMSK will transmit at 437.375 MHz. A ground terminal competition will be held on Dragonfly. STARS Me 2, a 1U CubeSat built by Shizuoka University, features an Earth observation camera, but the real experimentation takes place on the AX-25 radio downlinks on which those photos are transmitted back to Earth. Reception success rate at receiving ground stations will be measured at band rates of 1.2 kbps, 9.6 kbps, and 115.2 kbps. The coding gain of the error correction scheme will be measured on the downlinks, and the reception performance with polarization diversity at multiple terrestrial receiver stations developed by amateur radio operators will be evaluated. The goal is to learn more about how large data sets, such as images, are best transmitted from space. UHF downlinks with CW, 1K2 AFSK, 9K6 FSK, and 115.2 BPS GMSK are coordinated for 437.350 MHz, 437.400 MHz, and 437.200 MHz. RSP3 is also a 1U CubeSat carrying a camera, but in this case the cameras will not be aimed at Earth but at the stars. The main mission is to capture the star data by camera, convert it to an audible data, and deliver the audio to the ground as a stellar symphony. After acquiring data of stars and constellations captured by the onboard camera, an onboard AI will compose sounds from the star data and transmit it to the ground via an FM digitalker. In addition, digital data will be sent using various band rates and modulation modes, and a digital QSL card stored on the satellite before launch will be transmitted via SSTV after amateurs have uploaded their call signs from the ground. A downlink at 437.050 MHz will be shared by the FM digitalker, 1200 BPS AFSK on FM, 9600 BPS GMSK, and 24,000 BPS for FSK and OQP SK.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available to download as a podcast from anywhere on the web podcasts are available.
The Sable Island Charlie Yankee Zero Sierra team has announced that their de-expedition has been scheduled for March 19th through to either the 30th or 31st of next year. The operation received its approval this past spring from parks officials in Canada, but the dates in March were not set at the time. The group said that it has been fundraising to cover the higher costs of flights between Halifax, Nova Scotia, and the island, a significant increase, they said, since the 2023 de-expedition. The island is about 300 kilometers or 186 miles east of Halifax. The treeless and windy island, best known for its population of wild horses, is expected to pose a number of challenges during the expedition. The team leaders will be Murray, Whiskey Alpha 4, Delta Alpha November, and Glenn, Whiskey Zero Golf Juliet. Operators will be joined by a number of members of last year's Charlie Yankee 9 Charlie de-expedition to St. Paul Island, also off the coast of Nova Scotia.
And finally this week, autumn weather can be very tricky in the part of Kentucky that the Princeton Ham Radio Club, W4KBL, calls home. Area residents who rely on weather radios, the ones that receive alerts and warnings from the National Weather Service, often say those receivers can be tricky too. Sam Gray, KJ4TYE, the club's vice president and weather coordinator, said that's what inspired members to host a weather radio session recently. They showed local residents how to program their radios properly so they don't miss relevant weather watches and warnings in and around Caldwell County. Sam went on to say, I have heard many people complain about the weather radio going off at all times for counties not close to them. He said those radios ultimately get unplugged and put into storage. When a disaster strikes, they have no warnings. That changed on Saturday, September 20th, when club members greeted radio owners inside the Emergency Operations Center to demonstrate how to properly program those radios so that they receive alerts relevant to their specific county. Sam said the club, which is heavily involved in weather spotting, knows the value of these kinds of alerts, but also knows that these radios, like many products these days, don't necessarily come with clear programming instructions in the box. Sam said he encourages other clubs to reach out in their communities to people confused by the programming instructions and help them to receive the right reports. He added receiving alerts and warnings is key to preparing and survival.
This Week in Amateur Radio is holding open auditions for news anchors for the weekly national worldwide amateur radio news service. If you have a good radio voice and can reliably read provided news copy, we are looking for you. This, of course, is an all-volunteer position. An amateur radio license is not required. You must have a high-quality microphone, headset mics are not used, and be familiar with audio editing software to record and edit your finished news stories before uploading. If you would like to try out for a weekly or bi-weekly anchor position with North America's premier amateur radio news on air and podcast, please send an email to our producer, George, W2XBS. You can include a sample MP3 of yourself reading news copy sent as an attachment to W2XBS77@gmail.com. That's whiskey, the number 2, X-ray Bravo Sierra 77@gmail.com. Be sure and use Anchor Audition in the subject line. Please include your phone number and a good window of time for a callback to discuss your submission and our operating logistics to see if This Week in Amateur Radio is a good fit for you. We hope to hear from you soon. This Week in Amateur Radio is streamed on the internet, broadcast on low-power FM, and heard on nets and repeaters all around the world, like the K2IWR repeater operated by the Skyline Amateur Radio Club on 147.180 MHz in Cortland, New York, where This Week in Amateur Radio is heard each Tuesday evening at 8:30 p.m. Eastern. If you would like to have your club's repeater announced on This Week in Amateur Radio, send us an email with all the pertinent information to w2xbs77@gmail.com. Many of the news and information items heard in this edition of This Week in Amateur Radio have been provided by the American Radio Relay League, the ARRL Audio News Service, and the ARRL Letter, AMSAT, the Radio Amateurs of Canada, the Shortwave Listening Post, the Federal Communications Commission, the Radio Society of Great Britain and Ofcom, the South African Radio League, the International Amateur Radio Union, the Wireless Institute of Australia and the Australian Communications and Media Authority, the New Zealand Association of Radio Transmitters, the Amateur Radio Newsline, the Rain Hamcast, Eric Guth, 4Z1UG and QSO Today, QRZ.com, the International Telecommunications Union, the 425DX News, Parks on the Air and the Soda Reflector, and various news sources on the Internet.
With special thanks to all our weekly news sources and to you, our listeners, that wraps up this edition of This Week in Amateur Radio. If you'd like to write to us, you can find everything you need, including archive editions of the news service, at our website at twiar.net. And now, for all of us at This Week in Amateur Radio headquarters and our news team around the world, this is Chris Perrine, KB2FAF, wishing you a 73.